Hello and welcome to today's yin class. It is going to be a fun one. we only have, let's see, 5 poses. That's it. But they're good ones. They're really fun. I know I keep saying that. So what we're working on today is leg flexibility, legs and hips. And I'm trying to dance around the fact that we're working on the splits. And the reason why I'm dancing around that and sort of walking on eggshells is because so many people have, what's the word? It's like an inappropriate amount of discomfort when thinking about the splits, when I just need to talk about this for a little bit. I tend to tell stories when I do yoga. This isn't really a story, but if you think about the amount of people who I've taught who've said, I will never be able to do the splits. And I think, well, maybe. A lot of people think that, well, my body type, my bone structure, my this or my that doesn't allow me to do the splits. And a couple things there. One, doesn't really matter if we never are able to do the splits. It's just a silly yoga pose. Doesn't matter. What we're looking for is increasing range of motion for health and well-being. But the other thing is, if you actually think about it, and if you think of a skeleton with all of the everything removed, so soft tissue, right? We have muscles, we have ligaments, we have tendons. When those are not holding us all together, our bones can do whatever we want. But they can literally go into the splits without any trouble whatsoever. So when you think about what yin is, it's stretching soft tissue. And it's one of those things where whether you want to or not, if you were to spend enough time in these poses, you would eventually be a lot more flexible. So I just like to sort of remove the stigma of we're working on the splits and I don't want to do this one. Because again, all we're looking for is gently increasing range of motion. So having said all of that preamble, let's get started in a really nice one, and that's child's pose. So what I'm doing here is that I'm on hands and knees, and I'll sit back onto the heels. And the knees can be either together for a little bit more of a stretch or step them apart if you want a little bit more space in the pose. And then from here, I'm going to actually scooch my whole pose back because I like to have my arms forward. You can have your arms forward or along your sides. And then what we do is reach the forehead towards the floor. I like to have my arms forward, and then we just hang out here for a little while. I'm just going to come out while I chat about this, but if you're in this, we want this pose to feel nice. If it doesn't, there's a few things that you can do. You can place a blanket between the hips and the feet, or you can place a blanket beneath the entire pose. You could place your forehead on a block if the forehead doesn't quite reach the floor. Basically, this is a choose your own adventure. Try different props, different blocks, blankets in various places until this pose feels nice. So what this pose does is, for me, it actually is a stretch in the hips when I lay my belly on my legs completely and my chest. I am definitely feeling the rotation of the thigh bones in the hip socket. In addition, this pose, probably more than anything and probably more important than anything, this pose is very good at relieving anxiety. So by its nature, it's a fetal position and it can bring you peace. And so this is a great pose to come to anytime you're doing a yoga practice and you just need a break, you need a rest. So always know that this pose is available at any time. And for now, we can slowly come on up and out. And then the next pose is interesting because it's very similar to child's pose. All we're doing is stepping the knees apart as far as they'll go. And that little bit of a difference makes the pose a lot more intense. So I'm actually reaching for my blankets because when we have the knees together, for me it doesn't hurt the knees at all. But when I step my knees apart, first of all, they don't actually remain on the mat unless I turn sideways, which I absolutely could. But what I'll do instead is I'll put one knee on one blanket and another knee on the other blanket because I want it to be a little bit slippery. My mat is very sticky, so if I just put my knees on the mat, they won't move. So here I am on hands and knees, and then I have one knee on either blanket, and then I'm going to let, actually this one is on the mat so it's not moving out, but this one is on the floor. And so I'm just letting that knee go out as far as it'll go. And then I'm lowering myself down. And then we just hang out here. So this is a lovely hip opener. And the question I often get, I suppose it's the second most common question. The first most common question is, do we have to do this one? It is quite intense. So what I'm doing right now is I'm holding my weight, some of my weight forward onto my arms so that it's not too much weight into the hips. But then the second question again is, do the toes have to stay together or do they come apart? And then are my hips forward of the knees or are they behind the knees? And the answer is sure, for all of them. So you'll notice it's a slightly different stretch with all of those variations. So I have my toes almost together, not all the way because I'm not really, it's not like a hatha pose where there's very specific alignment issues. It's safe alignment, and this pose is safe with the toes together. It's safe with the toes apart. It's just a little bit of a different stretch. So I like to do all of them. So I'll switch it up a bit. I had my toes together. Now I've got my toes apart and I've got my hips fairly in line with the knees. But one thing I could do is move back a little bit, and it increases the intensity a little bit. And then if I move the hips forward, it decreases the intensity a little bit. Well, it just changes it. So spending some time in various positions within the position and just seeing how that feels a little bit. Holding as long as is available, coming out whenever you need to. I generally like to hold this one for 1 to 3 minutes, something like that. Let's just take one more deep breath here. And then to come out, I'm going to scoop my belly in and come back up onto hands and knees and gently bring those knees together and come on out. Okay, so I just got a little click in my knee there. So the next pose, that was frog. It was a very intense pose, but it prepares us for this next very intense pose, which is lovely. So when we have quote unquote intense poses, it's even more important to play the edge and not push past it. So I really felt like that wasn't much of a stretch there because I was holding myself up with my arms and not letting it go too strong. And that is important. That's what we want to do. We want it to be not awful. You know, this is yin. This is trying to relax as much as possible while gaining mobility. The next one is called dragonfly, and it is like a straddle. So we sit and we step the feet apart as far as they'll go. I like to have my heels up on blankets for this one as well. And I actually like to use a few different props for this. So I'm going to bring all my props here. All we're doing though is stepping the feet apart as far as they'll go. But for me, that takes a bunch of time and blocks and blankets. So I've got a folded blanket over here and then a folded blanket over here. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a to try and get my foot over there. And then, oops, that one let go a little bit. So gentle stretch. And then one of the things we're looking for, don't worry too much about this, but I get asked, do the knees stay up? Do they tip in? Do they turn out? Most people's legs, the knees tip backwards and their tailbone is slouching downwards as well. what we're trying to do is lift up tall so that the hips are level, the pelvis is neutral, and we want the knees upward-ish. If they're tipping in a little bit, that's okay, especially if you're leaning forward. So if you're not leaning forward at all, sit up onto a blanket. So I've got my blankets underneath my heels. What you'd want to do is the opposite. Sit up on a blanket and have the hips above the knees. So from here, one thing that I like to do, my legs like to tip in a lot. So I just happen to be an internally rotated person. That's another topic for another video. But because of that, I don't want them tipping in too much. So if my knees tip outward a little bit or inward a little bit or they're straight up, I wouldn't really worry about this. But because my knees like to tip in a lot, I like to hold a block here and keep my knees facing not completely up, but allow them to only a little bit tip in. This is just what I like to do. And if you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, don't worry about it. Feel a stretch, and then we start to lean forward, and then we just hang out here for a little bit. And then if available, maybe even closing the eyes. And just relaxing here. And if you're not able to relax, it means you're probably in the pose too far. So come on out a little bit. This is one I like to hold just a little bit longer than most of them for a couple reasons, but mostly because this is a pose we don't tend to do very often. In our general life, there's poses like squat that we tend to do if we're picking something up or what have you, or we might do, if you're sitting on the floor, you might reach for your toes. This pose we very rarely do unless you're in some sort of organized sport or some sort of class where they say, sit like this. So it's one that as humans we do probably the least out of all of the poses, all of the yoga poses in yin. Actually, that's not true. There's a couple of kind of awkward ones that we tend to not do on purpose. And it's also one that seems to, it's not true, but it seems to take the longest to achieve. And by achieve, I mean any results. It's one that people seem to feel like they do a lot and they don't find progress. And I just need to say out loud, that's not true. Even when it looks like we're not getting any further, a lot in the body is happening. So when we plateau, it's not really plateauing. It's just we can't see the results. We can't see what's happening, but there's a lot of things happening in the body with the fibers and the tissues. And it might look like nothing's getting flexible, but a lot is happening. So stick with it. All right. This pose is actually one that I quite like, even when I am at my edge. Some poses I'll be at my edge and it won't feel very comfortable, but for some reason I really quite like that. And I think that's the type of thing where different body shapes and proportions can make the experience a little bit different. But I still maintain the fact that any body can do just about anything with enough time. Okay, so next up is one that's just called dangling. And all we're doing is you could stand up and then bend forward to touch your toes. I'm going to try to avoid standing up at all, because why stand up when we could just get there as easily as possible and maintain that yin-like essence. So from hands and knees, we can tuck the toes under and then just head up until we're in that dangling position. So now on my feet, I have mine right now hip distance apart. And if you're very flexible, you could bring the feet all the way together. And then we just hang here. So I've got my legs straight right now. I've got quite a bit of flexibility though in the backs of my legs. So if you don't, and you're feeling it too much in the low back, simply bend the knees a little bit or a lot of bit. And you could maybe even hang on to the elbows.
and just hang out here. So you can play with it a little bit. For me, when I straighten the legs, I can feel it mostly in the legs. If you're straightening the legs and you feel it mostly in the back, try bending the knees. For me, I feel it the same either way, so I'm going to straighten. Eventually the legs are straight. Let me just hang out here. If you do have an issue with balance, you can bend the knees and place the fingers on the floor, or maybe the legs are straight with the fingertips on the floor. And we hold. Some people even feel this in the lower legs. And if that's you, that's totally fine. We can hang out here for a minute or more. You might want to close the eyes, but if you do, it might be wise to have some fingertips on the floor for balance purposes. And then if the body gives you a little more space, take a little more space. And one more deep breath here. And then to come out, we'll slowly bend the knees. I'm going to open my eyes. Slowly, slowly return to your hands and knees. And I'm actually going to take a child's pose. It's quite nice after that one. Just take a moment. And then slowly, slowly come on up. Oh, it feels like a nap time after that one. So there's only one pose left for today's class. And there's two sides, and it's also dragons. So we've done dragons variations a couple times. This one is the splits variation. So just to sort of recap, I like to have blocks to help with balance on either side of me. I like to have one knee, my back knee, on a blanket. And then I like to have my front foot, actually, for this one. Let's see. Yeah, near a blanket here. Okay, so right foot forward. Just to recap, we've got low flying dragons where you could even go low. We've got high flying dragons where we come up high. And before we head into the splits variation, I feel like it's important to do the high flying dragons. So lifting up tall. But one thing I like to do, so traditionally the knee is just a little bit forward of the ankle. That is somewhat controversial, and by that I mean in the West here somebody has decided that it's not good for the knee, but there's all sorts of reasons why this is totally fine for the knee. It would be no different than climbing stairs. Your knee goes beyond the ankle. If for whatever reason that doesn't feel okay on your knee, you're welcome to step it forward. And in fact, I like to have mine beyond. And the reason is because it transfers the stretch more to the back leg, the hip flexor, when my foot is forward. Plus, we're heading into the splits variation of dragons. So I'm just getting myself ready for that. And I'm slowly, slowly straightening that front leg. Slowly, slowly, slowly. Giving myself a little bit of a chance to stretch the hip flexor. Because when we do the splits, what we're trying to do is feel an equal stretch on both legs. Usually what we do is we put the hands on the floor and our body is forward and we straighten the front leg and we only feel the stretch on the front leg. But instead, we want to lift up nice and tall. This is why I like the blocks, because unless your arms are very long, which I sometimes wish mine were, it's difficult to find the balance and strength here. So now what I'll do is I'll scooch my front foot onto the blanket and then slowly allow the hips to lower as much as they want to. So this one is an arm strengthener. I don't feel like going in the full splits today. I am not flexible enough today. Some days it works, some days it doesn't. And so I want that arm strength to keep me from going too far. And so I hang out here and smile. And we hold for about a minute. Eventually with yin, it's nice to hold for longer.
Now, because this is yin, what would be even better is if instead of holding onto my blocks like this, if I had a block beneath my right hip. That would be a little bit better for yin, and then I could relax. So I do recommend that. I don't have quite the setup for that here, but a bolster beneath the right hip or a block, and then you can relax. And I'm just using the strength of my arms. So I'm really trying to separate the two. I'm trying to use the strength of my arms, but completely relax my legs. My legs are completely relaxed right now. Actually, I can go a little bit further. My body gave me a little bit more there. And then I'll slowly, we can come on out slow. So the whole point of the splits is that we go as far as we can go, and maybe both legs are very bent, maybe you're barely into it, but as long as it feels like you are reaching the edge of your capacity but not pushing past it, it's not that big of a stretch, it's a gentle stretch. Arms are working strong, you're doing it right, and that's as far as you need to go. And this one actually does open up quite quickly compared to some of the other stretches. So keep going with it. It's a nice one to find the progress. So I'm just going to switch sides here with my left leg forward, and we'll hang out in high flying dragons for a little bit just to get stretched out a little bit. First few seconds, my body does not like this stretch. The last one I quite enjoyed, this one not as much. So if that's the case, I'd like to take an extra moment to relax and breathe, especially left side. Go, gadget, left side. And then right about now, my body's like, all right, she's doing this on purpose. I guess I'll relax. I'm just going to scooch that foot forward just in preparation so we can start marching the foot forward a little bit. And you might just stay here. Wherever you feel like that's enough now, that's where it's a good place to stay. And then I'll maybe scooch my foot onto the blanket. And then slowly lifting up nice and tall. So I do want to make sure I'm feeling the stretch equally on both legs. And feeling it in a gentle stretch. So strong arms to hold so that my legs are really relaxed. Holding. And we breathe. And same thing here, usually about 30 seconds before the body's like, all right, fine. And then there's usually a millimeter, maybe 2, where the body will give you just a little bit more, a little more room. So remember, the legs are relaxed, very mild stretch, very, very, very mild. As if you could be here all day, except that the arms are working lots. But again, you could put a block beneath the left hip so that you can really relax into it. And let's slowly come on out. And then the pose I like to do is either child's pose or just sitting back onto the heels. After that one, just giving your body just a moment to relax after the splits in all directions. We did child's pose today, which was lovely. We did frog pose, which is fairly intense as a hip opener. We did dragonfly, which is stepping the feet apart. Dangling is a good preparation for the splits too. And then of course dragons, splits dragons. And that's it for today. That's it, that's all. But hopefully you feel all loosey-goosey and like you've got a lot more mobility in the legs. And I will see you next time. We'll do something different in yin. Bye for now. Have a really good rest of your day.